Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a moist, gray-ish day here in the microclimate wonderland of San Francisco. I've been listening to the Big Brian, string theorist, physicist. I can't remember if his last name is Cox. I just don't remember. Though he's one of the sort of most public figures in physics discussion, and is a teacher and so forth. He recently took a sort of public crap in Eric Weinstein's hand on a brief discussion I saw between them, and basically said, well, I don't take your geometric unity theory seriously because you begin by claiming that you're an entertainer, not a physicist. And Weinstein took that very, well, let's just say he took offense and said things like, how dare you, how dare you. Now, Weinstein, for his part, is a brilliant mind. I love listening to that guy. I learn something almost every time I hear him. He's great with metaphor, which is a very powerful communications technique, and probably the foundation of most or much of human cognition, metaphor and simile. Weinstein, for his part, claims that physicists have no rights to their discoveries, and entertainers do. So he wants rights to geometric unity, which I think he worked on for like 40 years and is his magnum opus. So I've been listening to Brian talking with Stephen Wolfram. And for those of you who don't know Wolfram, Wolfram is a non-human phenomena in a human meat suit. He wrote his first papers in physics around 15 years old, had a PhD by 20, developed Mathematica, which is one of the most sophisticated and useful implementations of the possibilities of computers ever envisioned. And he has a toy that he has been developing for many years, whose features and capacities for generating novel insights about physics and math and theory and perhaps ideas themselves may as well have been developed by aliens for how advanced it is and how meta it is to most of what the humans are up to. And the toy has a number of features. which you could think of as layers. And I'm not an expert on this toy, so I may get some things wrong here. In other words, I may misconstrue certain of the rather astonishing and yet also very salient features of what I'm referring to as Wolfram's toy. The toy involves thinking about space-time as something that resembles clusters of related locations. He sometimes calls these atoms of space-time, but he doesn't mean, or atoms of space actually, but he doesn't mean an atom in the way that, I think what he really means is sort of a pseudo-particulate perspective, right? And this produces something he usually calls the hypergraph. And is a relational model. The events, effects, and processes in the hypergraph depend on historical relationships, which you could think of in far too simplistic ways as two things touching briefly or non-briefly. This would be familiar to humans in a variety of ways. So for example, you have a relationship with your possessions, right? And there's very different forms of intimacy that you may have with your possessions. A broken possession, for example, has a different kind of character in your mind and emotions. Male Stellar's J just came to my hand for a peanut. Right, there's a relationship, right? That transforms both, in my view, our histories, our moment of now, and our futures. So we touched. Yeah. So a broken possession is different from an unbroken possession. An object with profound sentimental value is very different from an object with merely utilitarian value, presuming that it is even possible to have such a relationship where the only feature of the relationship is utility. Right? We are very complex, emoto, physical, spiritual beings. So it's probably impossible. It's easy for us to think that the relationship with X has just one dimension, it's single valued, it is this. Right? And for the left hemisphere, that might work okay. For the right hemisphere, that would never exist. It's just not how the right cerebral hemisphere is in the world, or of the world. So there's this sort of graph of relationship exchanges and complications over time.
Same with you guys.
Although it's not clear to me yet how time is represented in the hypergraph. And there's another feature that Brian didn't ask him about, which I think is fundamental. Wolfram talks about updates to the hypergraph and never says anything about what is the rate of updates from our perspective as observers or simulants, right? Because the hypergraph is a kind of a simulation. So I don't know what's updating the graph. Now, the graph could be understood to solve problems. It's not... the graph itself is a computational toy, but what it's a representation of is nothing like mere computation. And there's another feature of this toy, which is the rules that comprise both primitives and transformations in graph analysis, I would guess. And this space he calls the Ruliad. Now, these are incredibly sophisticated, astonishing toys that Wolfram has come up with after decades of trying to understand not just features of physics, but sort of how the universe is, what it's up to, what it's doing, and some kind of a window through which we could get a glimpse of the deep underlying situations. And from his toy, he has recovered many of the features of physics. By recover, it means that within looking at the features of the hypergraph and its interactions with the Ruliad, and the third feature called branchial space, which is historical and possibly futurial relationships, in my view, between features of the hypergraph or features of branchial space. This is so complicated. Can I even maintain my thread here? Let's see. So his goal was to understand if you could produce the kind of one way of thinking about his goal. Everything I'm saying here has a little asterisk next to it. I may have this wrong. This is my perspective, right? That's the asterisk. So, is it possible to produce something resembling the complexity of the phenomena we perceive and participate in as features of the universe? Right, so we are a localization of all of the things I've discussed, and you can see that very obviously if you look at your own feelings and relationships, actions, histories, vigilance over situations, choice making, and so forth. It's not necessarily true that we're solving a problem or problems, although that perspective is also useful, right? I'm walking right now, and my body is taking care of the extremely complex, probably almost unimaginably complex, decision trees and nerve group and muscle group and balance and all of these things without me having to pay any formal attention to it. And if I began to pay formal attention to it, that could have different effects. There are many forms of action or behavior that require that we not pay close analytical attention, right? Dancing, musical improv, though there's some space in there for close analytical attention, kissing, sex, eating, right? Analytical attention is involved in all of these, but if we were to become too analytical, the activity would fail. And balance is one of them, right? We have to kind of offload or inhibit analytical attention. Otherwise, we encounter breakdown of the fluidity that's required to successfully walk. That bird is just straight up downloading intelligence from space-time into sound. I doubt that its song behavior is highly analytical, though I suspect that there's some semi-analytical oversight, which is also true in many of the other activities I spoke of, right? Like, I put food in my mouth. If I'm relatively sure there's no bones in it, I can release that concern and just chew. But if there might be bones in it, I have to have some degree of analytical interaction as I chew, or bad things may ensue. So one of the things that tends to get overlooked in science, and it's clear that Wolfram is intimately aware of this problem, is the idea that we could do, for example, a controlled experiment. Right? We can adjust for the problem of limiting an experimental reference frame to the degree that we are able to, control for certain kinds of noise or stuff we're not interested in. Problematically, we are the stuff we're studying. There's no way to separate us from the universe. So the things we are studying are the things that are generating us moment to moment, also historically, also futurally. But very few humans think that, for example, we are the Big Bang banging away right now. In my Dandelion Toy, which is highly coherent to some features of it are highly similar to some of what Wolfram is up to, right? So in my toy, the updating the graph is the natural result of the collapse to unity and the expansion to distinction that's happening at an impossibly high rate, probably a higher and higher rate per minute, infinitesimal fractions of a second. Though it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that minute. It could probably be happening on a tenth of a second order or something like this. And also, for those of you who've been following the Dandelion Toy recordings, the registers, which I ordinarily paint as singularity at the core, but you can put it at the outside too, it's like the outside is a different mode of singularity than the inside. The outside produces localized singularities. We call them beings and situations and so forth. Whereas the inside produces collapsed, unitary, transcendental communion. But the registers, right, from singularity to impossibility to possibility to likelihood, or to probability, to likelihood, to semi-determinism, to the physical layer. Those are the registers going outward from the center. If you organize the dandelion in this sphere, in this way, this concentric sphere. But there's other ways to think of the registers, which is super important to understand, something I haven't really explored in the recordings yet. But branchial space is the relational infrastructure of the outer registers of the dandelion. And the Ruliad is a way of thinking about how the dandelion influences where intersections, relationships, collapses, and so forth arise. So I find this toy very interesting. And I am viewing it through my own, preferred lenses or so forth, my biases. But there's something that has come out. A few specific comments Wolfram made were extremely interesting to me. And one of them is that, I believe he said, in the hypergraph, or possibly in branchial space, momentum and energy are related to, and mass particularly, are related to how many times interactions occurred for a specific feature in branchial space, such as a particle, for example. And basically he said that mass is basically a measure of how many times something got kicked, right? Effectively, how many times did it bump into something else? Yeah. And this is very profound. But he said something else that's even more, I think, important to pay clear attention to. And that is that in situations of greater energy and momentum, right? So you could think of this in terms of like heat and acceleration. Shortest paths are deflected by that. Now I want you to imagine not just the universe, but what's producing the universe moment to moment, which is what's going on in my view. The histories and futures also matter, but the thing that's central is that everything is being regenerated at an unimaginably quick rate. And it's clear that certain features within physics that we don't have meanings for, right? We have measurements of them, which is most of what physics is, but getting at meanings, like what is a particle, we have no idea. Why are quarks bounded in protons and we don't find them outside of them? We don't know. Right? All of these things. So one of the things that seems to be going on to me is that certain features of physics, they're not necessarily problem solvers. They're path analytic, right? They analyze the possibility space And many of them, particularly those things we refer to as photons, they solve problems from multiple perspectives and multiple positions in time, or actually they solve path issues. So one can imagine, for example, that the problem with a double slit experiment is that some of the photons solve the problem from superposition. And I want to talk a little bit about some weird things about superposition. And others of them take more local paths, right, from the emitter to the screen. So it's as if maybe some portion of the photons or electrons that are being shot out of some gun, which also, in characters, it makes those gun electrons. Those aren't the same thing as regular electrons in my view, because their origin has a very specific array of characteristics that the humans don't know how to account for. So some of the, quote, particles, which they're not really particles, and they're not really waves either, and they're not wavicles either, take a rather traditional route, right? They go from the gun to the slit screen to the recording plate. Others of them solve the problem from outside of time. This is one toy that's useful to think with, even if it's not what's going on. And there are a lot of toys like this, and I suspect Wolfram's toy is like this. Everybody's concerned, the physicists are concerned, well, is it true? Well, what do you determine, what are your metrics for determining truth? And which kind of truth are you looking for, right? We suppose that the primary goal of organisms is survival. But you can easily see that surviving in an empty box for 95 years while food is delivered and waste is taken out is not helpful, right? So then you could say, well, no, reproduction is the metric from which we should measure the most important thing about organisms. Okay, but that doesn't turn out to work very well either. Then we could say, no, it's learning, right? It's like becoming more well adapted and more capable of transformation within the physical layer. Success is a multi-valued metric. And this is obvious to see in human lives. People who are profoundly creative or insightful or intellectually brilliant, they're like shining stars in the sea of ordinary humans. But similarly, there are mothers and fathers who are so amazingly brilliant. Their names are unknown in history, but their children live and transform and develop and learn and grow and beautify the world. Beauty is a metric that matters in nature. If this isn't obvious, just look at organisms. So, the utilitarian idea of, no, it's survival. No, it's reproduction. No, it's adaptation, right? None of these are wrong, but once they're made explicit, they are wrong. The nurturing of the possibility space such that it expands over time in relationships between organisms. This is a metric I trust, right? And the Earth, sans humans, sans technology, is a shining exemplar of this purposive orientation. it's very clear that animals, and I strongly suspect plants and insects, experience love and various kinds of fulfillment, which are no less fulfilling for being transitory. So it turns out, once again, that your angle of approach determines the species of what you derive. Right? It determines what kind of things you derive. And this has to do with collapsing manifolds, which is a way of taking a sum over the possibility space for a particular purpose or goal, and collapsing the possibility space to semi-deterministic projections or derivations. And there really isn't, this is such a primordial thing, this manifold collapse, and it's a feature of branchial space and the Ruliad and the hypergraphs as well. There really isn't anything else to do. This is not just how we make decisions, it's how decisions make us. It's a two-way. Relationship. So I want to get back to this thing that he said, which I believe was energy and momentum deflect shortest paths. Now he didn't go on to explain this, but shortest paths equate in the physical layer to liberty, right? The more short paths you have accessible, the more degrees of liberty you have. And your sensing of shortest paths, this interior compass that is not local to the brain or even the body, meaning neither merely the brain nor the body oversee the selectivity space, right? Both are involved, but there's something transcendental that is more fundamentally involved. Now, Arthur Young, who wrote his book, The Reflexive Universe, one of the most amazing books I've ever read, way up there for me. His perspective was that, which also matches with my Dandelion Toy, that more transcendental features of existence give up unity, give up, well, that's interesting. They do that, right? They do that in the transfer of expansion from unity into the physical and collapse from the physical into unity. And you can see that this process has purposive underpinnings. Yeah? So, Arthur Young, made a kind of a V graph, right? And I may not recollect it perfectly, but the principle will suffice. At the top of the left side of the V is light, and then the next down toward the point is atoms, and then next down is molecules, and then rising from the point toward the right, you get plants, the next up is animals, and the next up is humans. And his thesis here is that light is giving up modes of unity. Everything is light. It's kind of, which I think is confused, actually. Light is, in my view, most likely related, and my view is transforming, right? I'm trying to understand, not know. Light is the evidence of, light is the result of the collapsing and expansion of the dandelion. Or what, yeah, I'm not sure what that would be in Wolfram's toy. I'm sure he has a place for, and a way of thinking about light. And his ways of thinking about time are quite different from how we usually think about it as our mind. Are you a sick insect, or are you a dying insect? I don't mean you. There we go. Now you're right side up. Is that any better? No, it seems to be somewhat better for the moment. So, in Young's model, the universe is playing a game where the possibility space, degrees of liberty, forms of liberty, are inhibited or collapsed to produce new modes of unity at other orders or registers of existence. So, for the humans, one of those modes of unity, I mean, we have a lot of modes primarily because of technology, unfortunately, for just about everything alive. But the primary mode for humans are forms of sentience and cognition. And possibly even the sort of the third person perspective, which gives birth to science and technology. So this is very interesting, right? As you sacrifice degrees of unity, you get new forms of collapsed interactors, operatives, if you will, atoms, molecules, plants, insects, animals, humans. And it's quite possible that the V extends beyond light on the left. We'll just put a question mark up there for the moment, though I have some idea what that might be. In fact, I think it's the dandelion from one useful perspective. And above the humans, right, as well. Another question mark up there. It would be hilarious to discover, as Kardec thought, that humans give birth to the gods and the angels. But the relationship is certainly bidirectional. It's not merely one is less than the other. In the same way that the ocean and the fish, the octopuses, the shrimp, the corals, seaweed, the plankton, these are a unity expressed diversely in relational interactions. Okay, so I have a couple of crazy things I want to get to here, and I don't know how well I'm going to be able to articulate them because I've never attempted this before, though I've suspected various things. Someone that I know, I wonder if I can remember his name. He's a friend of Tom Campbell's, which is a class I don't belong to, who, tends to think, and this is a very simplistic way of stating it, but that the universe is a simulation. Whatever the universe might be, that's the wrong foot to put under you. It could be a useful foot if you're doing it playfully. If you're doing it seriously, I think this is a delusion factory. What is this guy's name? Anyway, we were having a conversation a couple decades ago, and I said, what's gravity? And he said, gravity is information. And there's something true about this perspective, right? And when you notice that Wolfram says energy and momentum deflect shortest paths in the hypergraph, we're getting at something very fundamental. And notice for a moment, right, in the Dandelion Toy, the physical layer is crucial but deceptive. It looks to us like that's all there is. It looks to some of us who are trying to be pragmatic or realists that only that which is physical or measurable or testable can be reasonably said to exist. There's a problem at the root of that, which is that your cognition, the stuff you're using to make that claim, is none of those things. And to try to solve that problem, people say, well, it's just a side effect of the activity of your brain. No chance of that being true, but who cares? It gets rid of the ghost in the picture. Nobody wants a ghost in the picture. Well, not nobody, but, no realist wants a ghost in the picture. No materialist wants any ghosts. There's nothing transcendental. It's all a mechanical accident. It's no purposive underpinnings. Meaningless, objectivist existentialism. And a kind of transcendental nihilism. In any case, this deflection of shortest paths comment, and I'd love to know more clearly what Wolfram means. I wish Brian had asked him, what does that mean? But it can be understood in Arthur Young's model as a reduction of degrees of liberty, right? The shortest path between 2 points is never, where it's a straight line, is in a construct. Outside of time, there are various solutions for distance, time, momentum, energy, and so forth that are instantaneous, and I strongly suspect meaning simultaneous. I strongly suspect that there's something that is more than simultaneous. Right? What is more than simultaneous? Well, it's events that are retrocausal. They affect a unity previous to the desire to cross an interval. Right? So they go back in clock time, linear time, and establish a relationship prior to the possibilities of measurement, by organisms anyway. And I also think organisms take advantage of this in various ways. Most of the features of what's actually going on are impossible from the sense of rational, linear, mechanistic, single map thinking, which is most of what humans do, with some mathematical and physical exceptions. We're extremely allergic to the idea of meaningful retrocausality, but I think if our species survives, we will discover that that's just as much a common feature of that which is as physical existence of objects and beings and relationships is. But there's this idea that gravity is information in branchial space. gravity might be understood as the result of clustering localizations of relational togetherness, right? Intimacy. But it's also the result of historical updates of the hypergraph that produce clustering in specific dimensions and elements of the hypergraph. So, for example, the Earth is a highly sophisticated clustering of organisms. Unimaginable numbers of them. Coming into existence, going out of existence, just like raindrops evaporating on the way down to the land, except these raindrops are rising up from origin toward localized manifestation, into local manifestation, into physical relation, and then fading out, but also often reproducing in that layer, the physical layer. So gravity, you know, we have something like gravity in our hearts and in thought. Our biases are very compelling. They have something like gravity. Our habits, very compelling, something like gravity. Our relationships, very compelling, something like gravity and anti-gravity, right? Rejection, right? Pushing away, and so forth. I would argue that most of the features, I mean, this is one of the places we get in trouble when people transfer quantum mechanical crude understandings of quantum mechanics, or even sophisticated understandings of principles of quantum mechanics, and they use this to explain woo, or telepathy, or survival of the soul, and so forth. I'm not claiming that there's no relationship there, but this particular game of stealing authority from science to, quote, explain metaphysical phenomena, I'm not a fan. I think the nature of metaphysical phenomena, the non-ordinary, I really like what Kastrup said. No, the ordinary is more interesting than the non-ordinary. I can't explain the ordinary. There's something very powerful to pay attention to there. Yeah, I see this all the time. I see people with a belief system trying to steal authority from some other system, right? The universe as a simulation is an example of this. And I doubt Wolfram. Though Wolfram's toy is a simulation toy, I don't think he thinks the universe is a simulation. I'd be very surprised if he thinks that. I think he probably suspects that something really mysterious and transcendental to our ordinary ways of thinking is going on, and it's possible to make toys about it that give us insight into that mystery and can help us solve problems that are otherwise unapproachable. But here's the weird thing. So mass and gravity, right? These are collapsings of principles in time-space, stars, worlds, organisms, as if the universe is bubbling within itself and producing unities and webs of relation in the physical layer. Also webs of origin, right? So like the sun is almost a physical exemplar of the core of the dandelion. It is origin. It makes life be now. Right? If you take that thing out of the picture, you've got nothing around here. And no one to comment on whatever might be going on either. Right? So there's another feature of this shortest paths loss, where energy and momentum are high, right? It's a reduction of degrees of liberty, modes, forms of liberty, right? You go from being able to fly in 1,000 ways to being able to fly in 100 to being able to fly in 3. Now it turns out that for the universe, limitation is very powerful, useful. Because as I commonly say, I think organisms are importing the impossible into the physical layer. And if you look, at amazing human beings of any kind, whether the other humans recognize their amazingness or not, it doesn't matter. That's not what's important. What matters is the amazingness that they import into being, relation, development, love, play. Yeah. So certain forms of limitation can lead to new forms of liberation. And this is very obvious from human behavior. If you just look at fasting. There's another thing that this kind of explains. The humans think, immersing yourself in very cold water is good for you. I suspect it is. My own experiences of it validate that for me. But what they don't realize is that they're reducing energy and momentum, right, which creates greater degrees of liberty. They think, oh, it's because cold shock proteins. Okay. There might be something like cold shock proteins, probably are, measurable, metabolites or something, right? But the collapsed thing of cold shock proteins is one of probably 1,000 different things that are going on when you cool the body down, right? And one of the things you're doing is you're limiting energy and momentum locally. They're reducing it for a time, and that might give the whole system new degrees of freedom for healing, recalibration, homeostasis, all kinds of things. Yeah. So it turns out that heat is a problem. Yeah. On Earth, we're sort of in the Goldilocks zone here. So we have sort of the right degree of, the right interval over the heat space for life to prosper and be sustained. Change that just a little bit, and you're done, right? Simplistic, quote unquote, simplistic organisms might survive. Hang on a sec. Turn this off. It's trying to save your ears from the terrible machine noise and beeping. The klaxon. You need to be able to store heat or produce heat for organisms, and you also need to be able to offload it, cool down. Thus we sweat as humans. And this goes back to my talk about temperature, which I haven't posted yet at this time. I may post it before this talk. My point, though, is that if energy and momentum deflect shorter paths, this wouldn't merely... Oh, let's see, I missed something. All right. So you've got cold, right? But you also have stillness in the mind. You have meditation. Meditation produces degrees of relational and cognitive liberty, and possibly non-ordinary aspects of liberty. That are inconceivable to non-meditators. So what's that doing? Well, one of the things it often does is it changes heart rate, right, which is one of the temporal pulses in an organism like ours. But it also dramatically reduces brain activity, right? It's cooling it down, right? Less energy, less momentum, more freedom. Now, I don't know that Wolfram would necessarily agree with any of what I'm saying. These are the takeaways that were surprising and interesting to me. But there's another one that I want to mention, which is this idea of karma. Yeah. So, more entanglement means more highly localized self. Yeah. And there are different ways of localizing the self. But it's not an accident, right, that you need a sun and a moon and a world with gravity. They're unique gravity wells, and there's something like the opposite of gravity too, but I'm not going to get into that. That draws souls, so to speak, into incarnation, yeah. And we have these ideas about reincarnation and so forth. I think they're very simplistic, most of them, and mostly our ideas of karma are far too simplistic to be good. But you can see that the physical layer, this gravity, creates causal chains over histories of relationships, and at the nodes in these chains, depending on how often they're bumped by other things, right, how many things they're sort of entangled with, eventually produces embodied beings. So this deflection of shortest paths is very fascinating. And I'm sure it has many implications, not just the ones my particular concerns highlight to me. And I'd like to know much more clearly what Wolfram means when he uses this phrase, deflection of shortest paths. And all of this is quite fascinating to me. The branchial space and the Ruliad profoundly resemble features of the outer three layers of the dandelion as I understand them, because when in this toy of mine that I was shown by a non-human intelligence, and not shown as in it gave me a model, shown as in took me into it so that I could experience it directly while in the physical layer as a human person. It solves all problems, right? It's not necessarily just a problem-solving thing, but it has that feature as well. And you don't get organisms without something like that going on, right? These are solutions to space-time problems, but they are also solutions to problems of intimacy, awareness, perspective, intelligence, sentience, relational depth, beauty. It's not just a single function. It's almost as if in the double slit experiment, some of the light is acting as if it's physical, and some of the light is acting as if it's origin, and some of the light is acting as if it's solving a path situation from, if not all positions, from a complex library of positions. that have a determining feature. Now, all of these things are inherently mysterious, and I don't want to evict the mystery. They will remain inherently mysterious no matter how profoundly our perspectives or toys advance. I think partly because the core of the dandelion, or that which generates the Ruliad and the branchial space and hypergraphs, is transcendental to the knowable. Right? It's outside that which can be structurally articulated in concepts or even in math. So the possibility space is always vastly larger than what you can get a grip on. And this is similar to our experience, right? There's no chance of you explaining the experience of eating delicious food, and you can't explain the experience of eating disgusting food either, though you can say things about it, right? That word's really funny. Out, right? About. I think it means effectively not outside. Like abnegation is, I think, validation. And I could go further and talk about OUT, right? Origin, universe, tree, time, relation, right? Out. And that's just a very simplistic toy. It's possible to make much more astonishing toys than that. So I'm fascinated by Wolfram. What an astonishing mind. I remember listening to a conversation between him and Eric Weinstein maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And Weinstein was poo-pooing Wolfram's approach, which I think was a catastrophic mistake on Weinstein's part. But what Weinstein was concerned with was, something like, okay, yeah, this is going to be my afterword here. Something like, he wants a new physics, right? He wants an answer to the stagnation in physics over the past 50 years that he thinks is primarily caused by string theory. But there's a bunch of things Weinstein is not considering. He seems to be fundamentally concerned with the fact that we've got a bunch of insane humans sharing a single atmosphere. That's true. And you should be concerned about that. But he thinks the answer is to go to space. And that's not true. For all kinds of reasons, right? So basically what he's looking for is a way to get us out of here, or some of us out of here, so that the game continues, because he thinks we're going to snuff this place right quick. And there's a good chance that that's true. If the humans are the only game in town, that's almost certainly true. I don't think they are by a long shot. I think they're just very confused and isolated. But there's two other things that Weinstein is not considering. And the first is that a toy like Wolfram's could generate the discoveries that Weinstein needs to get his wish. But unfortunately, there's something else he overlooks, which is that any technology that was powerful enough to get us to other worlds in space-time would be powerful enough to snuff this one right now. So he thinks he can trust the humans to use this technology to get us off-world, when what's running the humans will certainly use that technology to end life on Earth in a race to the bottom. Who gets the power first and how do they, right? So the actual problem is to produce intelligent human collectives that are so amazing that no one wants to do anything else but be in them. So I think Weinstein is very confused. He has a single valued goal and doesn't realize that it's very likely that there are intelligences that are specifically working very effectively, efficiently, and concernedly to ensure that the humans don't get access to space-time. Because if there are, quote, technologies that would allow that, and by the way, we already have all of that, we're just not looking there. It's called organisms. This world is not separate from the other worlds. You can step right into them from here, probably physically. And it's fairly clear to me that ancient peoples were aware of this, and probably utilizing it. Most likely there are humans on many other worlds already. So if the game is your concern, I think that game is already taken care of. But what Weinstein's not realizing is that he may have inadvertently given the humans, like let's say geometric unity is the right path, right? It turns out to be useful and true. Then he's given them a weapon that makes the atomic bomb look like a fucking matchstick, right? And he's not thinking about this. He just thinks, we got to get off planet. It's one atmosphere, a bunch of insane people. This isn't going to fly. He's right, that won't fly. But giving them a device so powerful that it could take us to other worlds would give us the capacity to obliterate this one instantaneously. And some captured human group, right, would definitely table that threat. So I think something's been purposefully inhibiting this particular feature, physics, intelligently interfering with this. And string theory could be a crucial thing that slows us down long enough that we might be able to establish intelligent cohorts of humans before we get the discovery that is, world-ending and could lead us to travel to other worlds, but not before it ends this one. I remember a Star Trek episode, I can't remember which particular series it was, but I think it's one of the more recent ones, where so there's a feature of the prime directive in Star Trek, right, which is don't interfere, don't uplift existing planetary cultures, right? Don't give them high tech, don't go in there and mess things up, mess around with them, don't let them know you exist. And the prime directive is violable, right? It's within the purview of any given starship captain to make decisions about how explicit to be in implementing this. This is an important thing about laws and rules, right? Humans think laws are explicit. They like to think this. They're not. This is why we have complex ways of evaluating crime and punishment, although those ways are primitive and stupid in almost every case. They make things worse. But the point is, the feature in this episode that determines whether or not you can introduce yourself to a planetary species, one of the features that's commonly mentioned anyway is the development of warp drive technology. And the Federation gets a warp drive signal from a planet. They send a ship there to make contact, and the ship goes incommunicado, so they send the Enterprise. And the Enterprise discovers that these people have discovered the warp drive technology, but they're going to use it as a weapon right? Exactly the kind of situation that I'm opining about here. And they don't realize what the repercussions of using a weapon, of using it in a weaponized way would be for time space. Now, my argument is that we are already in this problem. We don't realize that machines, in their relationships, in the way they transform the hypergraph, the Ruliad, branchial space, and the outer layers of the dandelion, are lethal to life and intelligence and being and souls and all these things. They fuck up histories and futures. And organisms never do this. They never do it. They're perfect in this way. They sustain and nurture and advance the possibility space of in the physical layer of the dandelion, and they affect the other layers very profoundly. The humans just think like, what you do on Earth, it just happens on Earth. They're dead wrong about that. The living worlds are a network that updates and transmits damage and health between them. So, I think Weinstein doesn't understand the difference between a toy and a theory. And Wolfram's toy is very amazing. It doesn't have to be true to be amazing. Weinstein was trying to figure out if it's true, if this approach will give us the key to the stars. And he says, nah, this isn't going to work. Right? So then he poo-poos the whole approach. This is very similar, in a way, to what Brian did to him when they were talking. Brian's like, you're an entertainer. I don't have to look, I don't have to look at your toy. You're not even a physicist. You don't call yourself a physicist. What's good about you? So these are some of my thoughts and perspectives today after listening to the incredible mind of Wolfram. It's like listening to an alien civilization. I treasure it. It helps me see better into my own concerns and quests and ways of seeing and understanding. I'm very grateful for the time that we've had together today, for your curiosity, attention, wonder, and speculations. And I wish you a very beautiful moment, day, and the resolution of the concerns and problems that may trouble you. I hope for the fulfillment of the promise of incarnation for all beings and for you. Take a moment, if you will, tickle the algorithm, say hello, ask a question, level a withering criticism, share or support my work if you feel motivated to do so. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.